Next from Springfield, we sit down with Republican State Senator Darin LaHood, who won the GOP special election primary on July 8th for Illinois' 18th Congressional District to replace former U.S. Representative Aaron Schock. We talked to Senator LaHood about his stance on such issues as entitlement spending, immigration, and combating ISIS, among others. This runs about 25 minutes.
So what are the key issues, if I might, that you're focused on? Let's talk about that. I think you're right. There's a lot of concern about the next generation, but what do you think, A, is causing that, and how would you approach those issues?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think if you look at this district in central and west central Illinois, a district that I've represented the people, I mean, I think there's certain values in this district that make us unique. I mean, people that work hard, play by the rules, strong faith in God, love of their community. But they have a lot of distrust in federal government and state government to that extent. And so, those values that I think are important and what makes America great and what makes, our history great, those are the values that I hope to protect. Now, whether that's fiscal responsibility, whether that's standing up for the life of the unborn, whether that's, looking out for ethics in state government and how we promote a strong national defense. I've had a record in 4+ years in the state Senate of standing up for those issues, whether it's fiscal responsibility or ethics or social issues or moral issues too. I'm proud of that record. And I think it's also important to be grounded to this district. Having a wife and 3 kids that we're raising in central Illinois, having spent an awful lot of time, a 3rd generation Peorian in this district, I think is important too.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of it, would you say? Is the economy where it should be? And if not, what would you do? What policies? What's your approach to fiscal? You talk about fiscal discipline. So what does that mean?
Well, I would just say this. I mean, an $18 trillion debt, I think, is not something that's acceptable. I mean, and the trend keeps going up and up and up. We have to reverse that trend of $18 trillion in debt, and no one's been able to do that. I mean, that's the first thing.
Actually, we have. We have back under Bill Clinton, but when your dad was in the Congress, and I would say the Republicans put the foot on spending right after Clinton had raised taxes in '93, we actually paid down the debt some.
Well, I would just say, if you look in the last 10 years here, particularly under Barack Obama, I mean, we have gone up and up and up. I mean, it's the highest it's ever been in our lifetimes.
Right.
And so when you look about, what we're paying the Chinese in some respects on interest, I mean, that has to stop, because that's an issue that affects that next generation that I talked about and how we make that American dream alive for the next generation. So I think fiscal responsibility on the debt is important. I also think, getting to a balanced budget. How do we grow the private sector? We're not going to grow the economy in the country or in Illinois with more government spending. We have to do that in the private sector. I mean, I guess I look at a company like Caterpillar, largest employer in the state of Illinois, but they haven't built a new plant in Illinois in 10 years because of the restrictive nature of regulations, workers' compensation costs, a high expense of lawsuit reform. Those are things that have driven Caterpillar out of the state. So we have to grow the private sector. And I think you grow the economy, whether it's at the state level or the national level, with good public policy. We also have to remember in Illinois...
Good public policy in the sense of getting out of the way of business?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you look at our growth in the United States this year, maybe it's 2.5%. I mean,
Of course, last quarter we actually had negative growth.
Right. I mean, that's a great example of the uncertainty in the economy. When I talk to people in this district, they want jobs. They want the economy to be flourishing. And there's a lot of uncertainty right now with companies like Caterpillar or Deere or small manufacturers and businesses. That has to be the focus. I mean, we have wonderful assets in this country. But we have to have good public policy, whether that's, how do we reform Obamacare? How do we get rid of Obamacare?
Well, what would you want to do about Obamacare? Would you want to gut it? Would you vote to get rid of it and start over basically with reforms, or do you think it can be reformed?
Well, a couple things. I'm hopeful that the current case pending before the Supreme Court, King versus Burwell, that it's found unconstitutional. I mean, that's what I think should happen, and I'm hopeful the Supreme Court will make that decision.
And we'll know that this month.
We will. We'll know that very soon. I think if you look at the constitutional issues there, from my point of view as an attorney, I think it sides on the case of being unconstitutional. But let's assume that happens, Terry. That gets thrown back into the Congress. We as Republicans have to be prepared to lead. We have to come up with proposals to lead on this. And I am against the proposal, the original Obamacare, taking 1/6 of the private sector economy and turning that over to the government. I don't think that's good public policy. Now, what do we do here forward? I think we have to look at the private sector. We have to look at things that have worked in the private sector and come up with solutions that are based on, pro-growth, private sector solutions there. And that would be my proposal there. But Republicans have to lead. And I have been, critical both at the state level and at the federal level where Republicans haven't come up with clear ideas. When we talk about conservative principles, we have to lay out a clear vision for what those principles mean, what freedom means, what pro-growth policies mean. We haven't done a good enough job either on the federal side or the state side with doing that.
Let's go back to Caterpillar. I mean, and trade. The president has been asking for expanded trade authority in Asia. Sometimes there's valid reasons to oppose a particular proposal. So, as compared to necessarily talking about what the president's proposal is vis-a-vis Asia, would you say more generically, are you pro free trade, or what are your thoughts as far as expanding America's ability to move monies, trade?
Yeah, I'm a strong proponent of trade as long as it's done the right way. If you look at this district, ag is the #1 industry in the district. You look at the 18th district, you have the Mississippi River to the west, you have the Illinois River. You look at the commodities that go up and down that river, down to New Orleans, that go all over the world. Our farmers are some of the best farmers in the world. They are the best when it comes to corn and soybeans. And so trade is important, whether that's trade in Cuba, whether that's trade in Southeast Asia or South America. You look at Caterpillar, you look at Deere, you look at ADM, and 70% of what Caterpillar makes domestically here in the United States goes someplace else in the world. And Deere has similar statistics on that. So trade is very, very important. What I have concerns about is giving all that authority to President Obama. That's what causes me some concern on that. And I'd be very, very cautious about giving carte blanche authority to the president based on his track record of executive orders and other things that I think are not constitutional.
And hopefully I'm not bouncing around too much here, but let's go back to on economic issues. Well, actually, let me pick up here something I'm reminding myself. When you were talking about the rivers and the trade, and you're right, and we actually make billions of dollars, I don't know the actual number, in trading those commodities, those agricultural commodities out of the Port of New Orleans. One area where we might want to be spending more money on the government is to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States and those locks and dams on the Illinois River and the Mississippi River that are long past their shelf life and are literally falling apart. I've seen videos where just some of the walls are falling into the Mississippi. We did rebuild as a country the Mel Price Lock and Dam down by Alton, but I think that's the only one. And just to give a little background for the people, I mean that our barges have to be broken up into two different pieces because the old locks and dams are too small to fit the barges through. So they should be 1,200 feet long now, they're only 600 feet, as well as falling apart. Senator Durbin says, yeah, but we can't come up with the financing for that. I don't want to paint you too much into a corner, I guess, but is that a legitimate, would you say, expenditure for government on that one? And maybe go ahead and expand it. What is maybe the proper role of government? What should government be doing and not doing?
Well, I think obviously the locks and dams that are run by the Army Corps of Engineers and other government entities, I mean, we have to have a functioning transportation system to get our goods up and down the riverways and on our roads and railways and all those things. How you pay for that, Terry, I think is the important question, how you pay for that. I think the mood in the country right now is, taxpayers are very dubious and skeptical about giving more money to the federal government or the state government because we haven't had a very good track record of spending that money. it's interesting when you look at, I'm a big proponent of the 10th Amendment where we let states decide how they do things. And I'll give you an example on transportation projects. When you talk about the gas tax, which I'm not supportive of a gas tax, but
no gas tax, or you mean not an increase?
Not an increase in the gas tax from where it's at right now, because when you take that money from taxpayers, it hasn't been necessarily spent wisely. But what's worked around the country is where states have taken it upon themselves. If you give people in Sangamon County a referendum or give them the ability to put on the ballot, citizens in Sangamon County, okay, we're going to raise your gas tax, 8 cents, but you're going to get a project here and a project there and a project here in Sangamon County where they're voting here. You give the ability to put it on for the people to decide in the local county if they want their taxes raised. I'm a big proponent of letting them decide that, not the state government, not the federal government. This has worked fairly well in California where you let citizens decide and the money doesn't get sent to Springfield or Washington, D.C. It stays locally, gets spent locally, and people are supportive of that. I think the more you can localize decisions and let people decide, again, from the federal perspective, look at the 10th Amendment, letting states decide. They're the laboratories. I may not like what Colorado's doing with marijuana, or I may not like what other states are doing, but letting them decide and letting states do what they want to do and let the marketplace decide that, or let elections decide in those states. I think that's an important component about how we decide federal policy is let's fully implement the 10th Amendment and let states decide.
All right, let's talk about some of the issues that you can't localize. Immigration policy, which is federal policy. There's all kinds, everyone knows, and certainly in the 18th district we have any number of people who are working in the district who are illegal immigrants. Mm-hmm. The federal government, the Obama administration, has basically turned a blind eye to this. What are your thoughts on immigration, which is surely to be a growing issue as we get into the presidential year?
Yeah, I would just tell you this. I'm in a unique situation. As a former federal prosecutor, I've actually prosecuted illegal immigration cases in federal court and sent people back to their country of origin. I mean, I would start off with the premise we have to stand up for the rule of law. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to secure our border and make sure that our border is secured. And then thirdly, we have to look at how we solve this problem. But, I've had a couple opportunities in the state Senate to vote on these issues involving illegal immigration. One was driver's license for illegal immigrants. I voted against that bill. I didn't think that was good public policy to reward people for illegally entering this country. I don't think that's good public policy. The second one was the DREAM Act, where you give grandchildren of illegal immigrants taxpayer-funded tuition at state universities, particularly with our fiscal climate in the state of Illinois with anywhere from a $6 to $8 billion deficit. So I'm a believer in the rule of law, Terry. And so if you, whatever the number is, say there's 12 million illegal immigrants in the state of Illinois, in the country, how you then tell them, well, whether it's amnesty that the president wants, which I disagree with, and by the way, I hope that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals strikes down the current case that's pending there on his executive order. But how do you then take 12 million people in the country and put them ahead or equally in line with people that have played by the rules? There's a process for legal immigration in this country. And that process...
It's a poor process, though, isn't it?
Well, it's a process. It's our law. And again, we go back to the rule of law. It's worked fairly well. But you have to comply.
I think a lot of people would say not to be argumentative about, just a lot of people have said that one of the problems is that the legal immigration is that it hasn't worked that well. They're pointing out that it takes years for people to become legal immigrants. But that might, the point is maybe that needs to be looked at as far as fixed.
And I would just say,
But we're not being overrun by Irishmen.
I routinely go to, we have a federal courthouse in Peoria, and you go to these naturalization ceremonies where you have all of the new people that, again, waited in line, right, played by the rules, did what they were supposed to do, complied with that, and legally became citizens. And when you go to those events, it's a wide variety of people. And that's what we want in our system. So then the people that played by the rules, all of a sudden you're going to take 12 million people and put them equally or ahead of them in line, there's something fundamentally unfair about that. And so, I'm a big believer, as I said, rule of law and securing our border first and foremost.
We had talked a little bit earlier about the debt, and you were saying how it has grown, and it has. I think it's grown about $7 billion, or $1 trillion rather. The official federal debt, it's now about $18 trillion or so. One of the real challenges, though, that has been facing the nation for years is the debt that's not on the books but is built into the entitlement programs. And they just continue, as I tell people, about 60% or so of the federal budget is entitlement spending. And then you throw in interest on the national debt, and all of that just grows on automatic pilot. So ironically, I think people aren't aware that if you become the next congressman, how much of the budget is off bounds, basically, unless we reform entitlements to the Congress in their effort to control spending. What are your thoughts on that, and just in general? I mean, should we do anything with entitlements, and if so, what?
It's a huge part of the budget. There's no doubt. There has to be an entitlement reform. I mean, that's the only way you're going to fix the budget. Is you got to have entitlement reform. You have to look at these programs that, whether it's Medicaid or whether it's Social Security, we have to come up with ideas on how we reform entitlements, because it continues to, suck taxpayer money out of the system and takes away from the things that the government should be spending money on, whether that's national defense or national security. But I am a proponent of entitlement reform. Figuring out how we do that and come up with a solution to that, I think, is important. But the fact that people are living a lot longer now than we ever thought they would, and that trend is going to continue. I mean, I guess it's a good problem to have, but when it comes to Social Security and the amount of money that we're paying out and taxpayers are on the hook for, that has to change. And I'm a believer, as somebody that's 46 years old, that I'm supportive of reforming my own Social Security, and I know my wife is too. We have to think about that as we move forward.
Right now, I'm older than you, but my retirement for Social Security would be 67. Would you be supportive of maybe moving that up, not for people my age, but at wherever you draw the line? Maybe it's at the people who are presently 40, but maybe moving that up to, say, a 70, because we are living longer. Would you be in support of means testing? So if someone's a multimillionaire, they don't get the Social Security, and we treat it like an insurance policy.
I think you got to look at all of these things you're talking about. And I think looking at it, from a tiered approach, I think is a fair way to do that. In Illinois, we have a 2-tiered pension system now, and we may go to a 3 and a 4-year 3 or 4 tiered pension system. I'm actually a tier 2 employee because I came in after January 1st of 11. But to the point on Social Security and entitlements, how we tier that, which is a fair way to do that, in looking at, my own personal opinion, raising that the retirement age on Social Security is something that, personally, I wouldn't be opposed to looking at that. Those are the type of things we need to look at. Everything needs to be on the table when we look at entitlement reform and giving taxpayers some relief, because that $18 trillion debt, again, is something, it's not going to be sustainable for future generations.
Well, and some economists, it's hard to put a hard number on this, but some economists have said when you look at the debt that's built into the entitlements, we're really looking as a nation right now at more like $100 trillion in debt. Unless you're just not going to pay Social Security, unless you're just not going to pay Medicare and Medicaid as the baby boomers age. I would say to the viewers, though, that if you're over 65, if you're currently getting Social Security, the reforms won't affect you.
That's correct.
This is for people that would be like your children's age and my children's age going forward. On one of the issues that's been in the news, in fact, just last night as we taped this on June the 1st, the Patriot Act is no longer. It needed to be renewed, and Senator Rand Paul, who's a Republican presidential candidate, held up the passage of that consideration. What would your thought be on the Patriot Act? I presume you follow the issues involved and the whole question of should government be authorized to go through, I guess, you might say, the metadata of our phone calls. They're not actually listening to our voices.
Well, I would just tell you this. one of the jobs I had as a federal prosecutor was I was the chief terrorism prosecutor for the U.S. Department of Justice for a little over a year. In that time, I reviewed search warrants, a number of other legal documents pertaining to many privacy issues. I'm a big believer that the Fourth Amendment in our Constitution should be abided by. Having a process where a federal judge looks at the probable cause to execute a search warrant or to look into people's lives. I mean, I think we cannot discount the Fourth Amendment and our process that we've had in place. I'm not a believer in giving carte blanche authority to the federal government to look into people's personal lives and metadata. I think that's against the constitutional foundation of our country. And so I have real concerns about doing that. Believe me, I'm a strong proponent of our military and our intelligence services and doing all we can to protect this country. But you also got to balance that with the Fourth Amendment and protecting people's privacy rights. And I think that's very important.
And I will add, your dad, I don't know to what extent you've had conversations, your former Congressman Ray LaHood, for a while served, as I recall, as the chairman of the subcommittee on terrorism after 9/11. So I don't know, have you ever discussed these issues with your father?
I have not discussed the specifics of the terrorism issue or intelligence issues, no.
How would you combat, though, on the other hand? This is a different enemy, and we see young people going off to join ISIS. I think I heard today that even a former colonel in the American military has joined ISIS. Mm-hmm. So, you know, back in the 50s, there was a book titled The Enemy Within. It was about communism. Mm-hmm. Today we legitimately have people who might be enemy combatants living within the United States. What can we do? What kind of policies would you support or approach take against that?
Well, I would just tell you, I mean, I think we have the best military in the world. We have the best intelligence services in the world. You know, I'm not sure, you look at what happened with, not keeping the troops in Iraq and the decision to pull them out. I think that was a flawed decision to pull the troops out. Now that when you look at it, particularly when you look back after World War II, what we did in Germany, what we did in Japan, and keeping troops there.
South Korea,
I mean, you can go down the list. The decision made by President Obama, I think, was wrong. And I think we're seeing the effects of that right now. But make no mistake about it, what ISIL or ISIS is trying to do, they want to destroy our way of life. And this is an entity we have not seen before. And we have to, strategically and working with our partners, continue to support our intelligence services and our military services to do all we can to fight this. When you see Christians murdered in Libya, Coptic Christians, and you see, people burned alive in cages, this is barbaric. And this is another level that we're at. And we have to fight them over there so they are not here in the United States. And, again, intelligence services and military services, we have to support and continue to fight them over there so they don't come here.
As we close out, let me just give you the last word as far as why should people vote to send you to Congress?
Well, I think there's two important things about this job, whoever you elect as your next member of Congress. One is how you vote on issues. So it's not what you say in a press release, it's how you press that button when you get to Washington, D.C. And those important issues of how you vote on Obamacare, how you vote on illegal immigration, how you vote on Common Core, how you vote on term limits. I've had a record in the state Senate of voting on those important issues and had a very conservative record on those issues. I think it reflects this district of the 18th district, and I'm proud of my conservative record on there. And if I'm fortunate enough to get elected, I'll carry those same conservative principles to Washington, D.C. I think the second part of this is, again, how do we make sure and protect the values that make this district important? People that work hard, play by the rules, have a strong faith in God, and care deeply about their community. They have a mistrust of the federal government, and protecting those values is what's going to protect future generations in this country. And again, I've had a track record of doing that in the state Senate. I'm raising 3 boys with my wife in this community. I'm going to stay grounded to this community. I think those are important aspects about this job. And the last thing I'll say, Terry, is I'm proud to have the endorsements I have in this race, whether it's Governor Bruce Rauner, whether it's the NRA, National Right to Life, the Chamber of Commerce, and lots of other people. They're the people that know me the best and have endorsed me in this race. But the real endorsement is the voters, and I'm going to work very hard between now and July 7th to earn every vote and take nothing for granted to earn the respect and the votes in this district.
All right, Senator Darin LaHood, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.